Dan Bongino leaned closer to the microphone today and stated that he intended to demonstrate she was the greatest charlatan in the history of Congress. He spoke with a calm demeanor, as if he were simply delivering a weather forecast or reciting a basic fact that everyone present would soon acknowledge as reality. The hearing room of the House Oversight Committee fell into a complete, deadened silence. Every camera operator, every journalist, and every staff member froze exactly where they stood. Then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez let out a laugh, not one of nervousness, but a rehearsed performance meant to signal that this man was beneath her notice. It was the sort of laugh she had practiced in front of mirrors, the type that translated perfectly into Instagram video clips. Thinking this would be entertaining, she leaned toward her own microphone, her $3,000 blazer catching the studio lights at just the right angle. Her team had selected that specific jacket for the cameras, and they had spent 45 minutes perfecting her makeup that morning. This was intended to be her moment of triumph, another viral video where she decimated a Republican witness. A failed police officer turned podcast host thinks he is going to lecture me about fraud, she thought. She paused for dramatic effect, glancing around the room with a look of theatrical disbelief on her face. She asked if he was going to try selling her gold coins, or perhaps some survival rations for the end of the world. Scattered chuckles emerged from the Democratic side of the aisle, and a few aides took out their phones to record what they expected to be another takedown by Ocasio-Cortez. She was in her element now, doing what she did best, and being the person she had created. She was the queen of the clapback, the warrior of social media, and the voice of a generation. She suggested he should stick to yelling into a microphone for angry baby boomers. She continued by saying he should leave the actual work to people who truly comprehend policy matters. More laughter followed, and a staff member gave her a supportive thumbs-up signal. Bongino did not move a muscle, sitting perfectly still with his hands clasped on the table. He watched her performance with the patience of a man who had served 12 years in the Secret Service. He had guarded presidents, faced genuine lethal threats, and learned the art of waiting. The laughter eventually died down, and the silence began to stretch out uncomfortably. Ocasio-Cortez's smile flickered for just a split second, as she was unaccustomed to opponents who did not react to her goading. She fed on emotional responses and absolutely required them to function. Bongino asked in a voice that was flat and unimpressed if she was finished. She retorted that she was just getting started and called him a tough guy, adding that he represented everything wrong with the country. Bongino reached down and unlatched his briefcase, revealing leather that was worn and practical rather than fancy. He replied that he was also just getting started. He withdrew a single folder that was neither thick nor dramatic, just a plain manila file with a typed label on the cover. He placed it on the table, positioning it precisely so every camera in the room could capture the text. The label read, "Ocasio-Cortez the Fraud," causing the room to stir as whispers rippled through the audience. Bongino let the figure of $47 million hang in the air, not rushing the words but giving them space to resonate. That is the amount of money that flowed through your network of PACs, LLCs, and shell companies over the last 4 years. $47 million came from people who believed in you. He opened the folder and stated that he knew where every single penny had gone, tracking every transfer, every payment, and every lie. He looked directly at her, his eyes steady and filled with certainty. By the time I finish here today, everyone watching will know exactly where it went as well. He pulled out the first document and remarked that she should have remained a bartender. At least that was an honest profession, he added. Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth to respond, to deliver a sharp retort, or to do what she always did. However, no words came out this time. For the first time in her political career, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had absolutely nothing to say. Dan Bongino was merely beginning his presentation. Bongino turned to the first section of the folder, moving with the methodical patience of a man who had built cases against drug cartels and shielded presidents from assassins. Every gesture he made was deliberate, and every pause was calculated for maximum impact. He suggested they start with something simple, specifically how she lived her life. Ocasio-Cortez rolled her eyes with a practiced air of dismissiveness. She muttered that here they went again with the right-wing obsession regarding her clothing. She called it very original and very creative sarcasm. Bongino clarified that it was not about her clothes, Congresswoman, but rather her choices. He spoke of the vast canyon between what she preached and how she actually lived her life. He retrieved a document which was a lease agreement. You talk frequently about affordable housing and call it a basic human right. You claim working families are being crushed by rent prices, pushed out of their neighborhoods, and forced to choose between food and shelter. He placed the lease agreement on the table. Your apartment in Navy Yard, Washington, D.C., costs $3,500 a month. It is a luxury building featuring a rooftop pool, a state-of-the-art fitness center, and a 24-hour concierge service. He looked up at her and noted that this rent is more than most families in her district earn in a complete month. He clarified that he meant their total income, everything they make from working 2 or 3 jobs, not just their rent. Ocasio-Cortez shifted in her seat, her posture changing slightly, not much, but the cameras caught the movement. She argued that such prices are standard for D.C. housing and that members of Congress need to maintain 2 residences. Bongino asked if they really did, pulling out another document, which was a spreadsheet with highlighted rows. Here is a list of available apartments within 2 miles of the Capitol building. There are plenty of options under $2,000, and some are even under $1,500. These are modest places, the kind of places where working people actually live. He set the list down and noted that she did not want those options. You wanted the luxury building, the one with amenities that most of your constituents will never experience in their lives. You chose the one that costs more per month than some of them earn in 6 weeks of full-time labor. He paused and said, "There is nothing wrong with wanting nice things, Congresswoman. There is nothing wrong with enjoying success. However, there is something wrong with building your entire political brand on telling other people they cannot have nice things while you live in luxury." Ocasio-Cortez's attorney leaned over to whisper something, but she waved him away with an irritated gesture. Bongino moved on to the next exhibit. Let us discuss the Green New Deal, your signature piece of legislation. This is the policy that made you a national figure. He pulled out a thick document. You stood on the floor of the House and declared that climate change is an existential threat. You stated, "We have 12 years to act, or the world as we know it will end." You insisted that every American needs to radically change how they live, how they travel, and how they consume. He extracted a spreadsheet. 66 flights in 12 months were exposed in FAA records. Every single one of them was in first class or business class. The room stirred with this revelation. Your personal carbon footprint from air travel alone is larger than that of 20 average American families combined. That represents 20 families over the course of an entire year. He set the spreadsheet down. You want working people to give up their cars. You want them to stop eating meat. You want them to fundamentally transform their lives to save the planet. He looked at her and asked if first class was more comfortable. Ocasio-Cortez grabbed her microphone, her voice pitched higher than before. She claimed those were work-related flights for official congressional business. Bongino asked if they really were, pulling out a photograph. He held it up so every camera could see it clearly. This is Miami Beach in February of 2021. While Texas was freezing and people were literally dying without power or heat, you were there. The photo showed Ocasio-Cortez in a bikini with a champagne glass in hand, laughing on a beach cabana. You flew to Florida for a fundraiser at a beachfront mansion. Meanwhile, your colleagues were organizing relief efforts, and your constituents in New York were dealing with their own winter weather emergencies. He set the photo down. This image was posted by a friend of yours on Instagram. They deleted it within an hour when someone pointed out the optics, but nothing ever really disappears from the internet. He pulled out another image. And here you are, 2 days later, back in New York, tweeting about climate justice and the urgent need for the Green New Deal. He looked at her with something approaching pity. He remarked that he was sure the champagne on the beach was nice, though. Ocasio-Cortez's face flushed red, and her hands gripped the edge of the table. She stammered that it was a previously scheduled event. Bongino interrupted, saying, "Let's move on." He was not interested in her explanations because he was building a case. You champion defunding the police. You say communities do not need armed officers patrolling their streets. You claim the money should go to social services, mental health workers, and community programs instead of cops. He spread out a new set of documents. These are your personal security expenses for the last 2 years, exposed through financial disclosures that your office tried very hard to bury in paperwork. He pointed to the numbers, noting over $70,000 exposed right here in black and white. He looked at her. Armed private security, trained professionals with guns, are employed to keep you safe, while you tell single mothers in the Bronx that they do not need police protection. She argued that it is completely different because she receives credible death threats. So do they, Congresswoman. Bongino's voice hardened. The single mother working the night shift at a bodega in your district faces threats. The elderly man walking home from church faces threats. The kids trying to get to school through gang territory face threats every single day. These are real threats and constant threats. He paused. The difference is that they cannot afford $70,000 in private security, and you want to take away the only protection they have. The room was completely silent now, and even the clicking of keyboards had stopped. Bongino pulled out one more set of documents from this section. It concerned her staff, the people who work for her every day. These were the young idealists who believed in her message and wanted to be part of her movement. He read from an official filing regarding anonymous complaints filed with the Office of Congressional Ethics. "Let me read you some highlights," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. One quote stated that the Congresswoman demands absolute loyalty, but treats staff like personal servants. It continued that unpaid overtime is expected, and any complaints are met with threats about career consequences. He flipped to another page. Another quote claimed she preaches about workers' rights on television but runs her own office like a sweatshop. Interns work full-time hours with no compensation while she gives speeches about living wages. He read another page quoting that there are 2 versions of her. The public one, who cares about working people, and the private one who screams at junior staff for bringing the wrong coffee. He set the documents down. The champion of the working class cannot even treat her own workers with basic human decency. Ocasio-Cortez's voice cracked as she claimed those complaints were never substantiated and were anonymous accusations from disgruntled people. Their sworn statements were filed under penalty of perjury, Congresswoman. These are from people who worked for you, who believed in you, and who saw who you really are when the cameras are not rolling. Bongino closed that section of the folder. But, you know what? Living like a hypocrite is not actually a crime. It is just sad, just pathetic, and just proof that you do not believe a single word of what you preach. He opened the next section, where the pages were thicker and more dense. This is where we get to the actual crimes. Bongino took a slow breath before continuing. He understood pacing, and he understood how to build tension. This was the section that would end careers. "Let's talk about money," he said. "Specifically, let's talk about the $47 million that flowed through your political network in 4 years. He pulled out a complex diagram with lines connecting boxes and arrows showing flows of money. Names and organizations were tangled together like a web. Brand New Congress PAC, Justice Democrats, and Courage to Change PAC were 3 organizations all connected to her. They were all moving money in patterns that would make a professional money launderer jealous. Ocasio-Cortez forced a dismissive laugh. She claimed those are legitimate political organizations that support progressive candidates across the country. They were used to move money in circles until no one could trace where it actually went. Bongino held up the diagram. "Let me walk you through it step by step, simple enough for everyone watching at home to understand." He pointed to the first box where donations come into Brand New Congress PAC. These came from small donors, working people, and people who believed in your message about fighting corruption and representing the little guy. They gave $20 or $50, whatever they could afford. Some of them skipped meals to donate. He traced a line on the chart showing that money then gets paid to Brand New Congress LLC. This is a private limited liability company for campaign services. Sounds legitimate, right? Another line showed Brand New Congress LLC then pays a company called Middle Seat Consulting for more services. He looked up and asked if she wanted to guess who controls Middle Seat Consulting. Silence filled the room. "It is your former chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarti, the same man who founded Justice Democrats and the same man who recruited you to run for Congress in the first place. He is the man who discovered you at a casting call. Yes, a casting call for progressive candidates." Bongino set the diagram down. "The money goes in a circle from PAC to LLC to consulting firm and back into the pockets of your inner circle. Along the way, millions of dollars simply disappear into vague categories like operating expenses and consulting fees." He pulled out official filings. Federal Election Commission records show over $1 million in payments that cannot be properly accounted for. The documentation is missing, the services are undefined, and the money just vanished. He spread the papers out. "The FEC has received multiple formal complaints about these arrangements. They have been investigating for years. The only reason charges have not been filed is because the commission has been deadlocked along partisan lines." He looked at her. "But the FBI does not have that problem, and they have been looking at this very carefully." Ocasio-Cortez's attorney was writing furiously on a legal pad, and he looked pale. "Let's talk about something more specific," Bongino continued. "Let's talk about your boyfriend." The room went very still because this was personal now. "Riley Roberts is your longtime partner and, by all accounts, a nice enough guy. He is not a political operative, not a campaign strategist, and not a communications expert. His background is in web development. He set down payment records showing your campaign and associated PACs paid Riley Roberts $6,000 a month every month for over a year. This was for marketing consulting. He did the math out loud. That is more than $72,000 from donor money for marketing consulting." He looked at Ocasio-Cortez. What did he produce? What campaigns did he create? And what marketing strategies did he develop? What deliverables exist with his name on them? The silence stretched. "I will answer for you, Congresswoman, because there is nothing. There is no portfolio, no documented work product, and no evidence that he did anything at all to earn that money. It was just checks written to your boyfriend from funds donated by working people who thought they were supporting a political movement. Ocasio-Cortez's voice rose defensively. She claimed Riley provided valuable digital strategy and ongoing consultation. Then show me, Bongino's voice cut through her explanation. Show this committee one single piece of work he produced. Show one strategy document, one campaign creative, or one email chain discussing deliverables. Show one anything. She did not respond. I have reviewed every filing and every document your campaign produced. His name appears only on payment records and never on any actual work product. He pulled out another piece of paper and said, "Here is where it gets really interesting. Let me tell you about Maria Gonzalez." He paused, letting the name settle into the room. Maria Gonzalez is a single mother of two who lives in the Bronx in your district. This is the district you claim to represent and fight for. He set down a printed statement. Maria works 2 jobs, cleaning office buildings downtown at night and working at a laundromat, folding other people's clothes during the day. She makes about $14 an hour when you average it out. She has no benefits, no sick days, and no vacation. He looked at the document. In 2018, Maria donated $50 to your campaign. That $50 represented a full day's wages for her. She had to skip buying groceries that week to afford it. He looked at Ocasio-Cortez. She believed in you, watched your videos, and saw someone who looked like her. She saw someone who talked about struggles like hers, and who promised to fight for people the system had forgotten. He tapped the payment record for Riley Roberts. Maria's $50 helped pay your boyfriend $6,000 a month to produce nothing. His voice dropped lower. Maria skipped meals so her kids could eat that week, and her donation went to subsidize your boyfriend's lifestyle. Ocasio-Cortez blinked rapidly, and her eyes were getting wet, whether from emotion or calculation was hard to tell. She started to say that was a gross mischaracterization of how campaign finance works. Is it? Bongino pulled out an email printout. Let me read you something. This is an email from your personal account to Saikat Chakrabarti, dated March 15, 2019. He read slowly, making sure every word was captured by the microphones. Quote, make sure the transfers do not look connected. Use different entity names for each step. The small donors can never find out who is really benefiting from their money. Keep it clean on paper, end quote. He set the email down on the table. That is not staff making accounting errors. That is not confusion about complicated campaign finance regulations. That is you, personally and directly, instructing your chief of staff to hide where the money was going. A Democratic member of the committee shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The ranking member was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. You told Maria Gonzalez and thousands of donors just like her that their money was funding a movement. You told them it was a revolution and a fight for the working class against the corrupt establishment. Bongino's voice hardened. It was funding your inner circle, your boyfriend, your political operatives, and your personal lifestyle. He pulled out one final document from this section. This showed the total amount of donor money that went directly to entities controlled by you, your boyfriend, or your close personal associates based on FEC filings and corporate registry records. It was $4.2 million. He let that number sit in the air. $4.2 million from people like Maria Gonzalez. It came from people who sacrificed for you and who believed you were different from every other politician. He closed that section of the folder. But that is just the money we can trace to American donors. Not all the money came from Americans. He opened the next section and said, "That is where this story gets really dark." Bongino turned to a new tab in the folder. This section had photographs clipped to the top, images that had shaped history. June 24th, 2018, he began, was a date that transformed your entire career. It was a date that made you a national figure. He held up the famous photograph that every person in America had seen. It showed Ocasio-Cortez at the border fence in Texas with her hand pressed over her mouth and tears streaming down her face. It was the image of compassion confronting cruelty. This image went viral within hours and was shared millions of times. It launched 1,000 news segments and magazine covers. It turned you from a long-shot primary challenger into a national icon. He set it down gently and almost reverently. A young Latina congresswoman was overcome with emotion at the sight of immigrant children separated from their parents. It was powerful, it was moving, and it was exactly what the moment needed. He paused and said, "There is just one problem with that narrative." He held up another photograph. This was taken 5 minutes before the famous shot at the same location on the same day. It was by the same photographer, actually, who kept all his images and was kind enough to share the complete sequence with federal investigators. The second photo showed Ocasio-Cortez in the same white outfit at the same fence. But she was not crying. She was laughing with her staff, checking her makeup in a phone screen, and adjusting her hair for the cameras. And this one was taken 12 minutes after the crying photo. It was a third image showing Ocasio-Cortez smiling broadly and posing for selfies with supporters. There was not a tear in sight, and her makeup was fresh and perfect. Your grief lasted exactly as long as it needed to for the photographers to get the shot. That was approximately 5 minutes sandwiched between smiles and selfies. Ocasio-Cortez shook her head vigorously, her voice rising. She claimed those photos were completely taken out of context, and that she was genuinely overwhelmed by what she saw at that facility. "Were you?" Bongino pulled out a text message log. "This is from your communications director that morning, sent 3 hours before you arrived at the facility." He read from the printout. Quote, "Make sure photographers are positioned at the fence before she arrives. We need the emotion shot. Have tissues ready in case she needs them. Tell her to think about something sad if she needs to get the tears going." End quote. He set it down. The emotion shot. That is what your team called it. It was not a genuine moment of human compassion. It was a shot, a performance, something to be manufactured and captured for maximum political impact. He pulled out another text exchange. And this one is from you, sent to your campaign manager 2 hours after the photos were taken. He read, quote, "The crying pic is blowing up everywhere. This is going to be massive for fundraising. Get the donation page ready. We need to capitalize before the news cycle moves on," end quote. His voice dropped lower and harder. The children in those facilities were real. Their fear was real. Their confusion about being separated from their parents was real. Their suffering was real. He looked directly at Ocasio-Cortez and stated that she used them as props for a fundraising email. Ocasio-Cortez's voice cracked with what might have been genuine emotion. She claimed she cares deeply about those children and has fought tirelessly for immigration reform. "Have you?" Bongino pulled out a calendar document. "This is your official congressional schedule for the 2 years following that famous photograph. Let's count how many times you visited a border facility to actually engage with the issue." He flipped through the pages. The answer is 0. Not once did you ever go back. The photo opportunity was enough. He pulled out more documents. But you did find time to do 427 media interviews about the border. You found time for magazine photo shoots and documentary appearances. You found time to raise $11.3 million off immigration-related appeals. He set the papers down. You just never found time to actually go back and do anything substantive about the problem. He spread out printouts of her social media posts. You called those facilities concentration camps. You compared Border Patrol agents to Nazi guards. You said America was operating a system of state-sponsored terror against brown children. He looked at her. Those were strong words, inflammatory words, and words designed to generate maximum outrage and maximum donations. He pulled out a different document. They were words that also put targets on the backs of federal agents trying to do an impossible job. He read from an incident report. 3 Border Patrol agents were physically assaulted by protesters who cited your rhetoric as justification. One of them, Agent Manuel Padilla, was hospitalized for 2 weeks with a severe concussion and 3 broken ribs. He has a wife and 3 young children who spent those 2 weeks wondering if their father would ever be the same. Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth, but for once nothing came out. You got your headlines, while Agent Padilla got brain damage and broken bones. Bongino moved to the next page. But let's examine what you actually did for immigration policy. Not the tweets, not the Instagram stories, and not the cable news appearances. Let's examine the actual legislative work. He held up a thin document. This is every piece of immigration-related legislation you have sponsored in 4 years in Congress. He flipped through the pages slowly. It contained resolutions, non-binding statements, symbolic gestures, and press release material designed to generate social media engagement. He set it down. Not a single substantive bill became law. Not one policy change actually helped a single immigrant family. It was just performance. He pulled out financial records. But while you were performing outrage, something interesting was happening with your fundraising. Open border advocacy groups and organizations pushing for abolishing and ending all deportations were donating heavily. These groups, wanting to remove every barrier to entry, donated heavily to your PACs after that photo went viral. He pointed to specific line items. Some of these organizations have been flagged by law enforcement for concerning connections. These are money flows that trace back through several layers to people who profit from chaos at the border. Ocasio-Cortez slammed her hand on the table. She shouted that is an outrageous and racist insinuation. Is it? Bongino held up a Department of Homeland Security report. This is from an ongoing investigation into funding networks for organizations that actively work to undermine border security. Your PACs received donations from 3 groups specifically named in this report. He set it down. Did you check where the money came from? Did you ask questions about these donors? Did you do any due diligence at all? Silence followed. You just cashed the checks and kept performing. He leaned forward slightly. Every year, thousands of migrants die crossing the desert because they were told the border was open and America was waiting with welcome arms. Women are assaulted, children are trafficked, and families pay their entire life savings to criminal organizations who leave them to die in the heat. His voice was hard now, no longer professorial, and something closer to anger. And you profit from the chaos. You fundraise off the suffering. You build your political brand on the bodies of people you claim to care about. He closed that section. But exploiting immigrants for donations and social media engagement is not even the worst thing you have done. He opened the next section of the folder. This was the final major section. The worst thing is what you really think about the people who actually voted for you. These are the people who believed you were one of them." Bongino paused before opening this section. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming quieter and almost sad. "This is the part that is going to hurt the most." He said it would not hurt her, Congresswoman, because she already knew what was in there since she lived it. He looked toward the gallery and toward the cameras. "This is going to hurt the people watching at home. It will hurt the people who believed in you and saw you as a symbol of hope." He opened the folder. Let's start with Amazon. Ocasio-Cortez visibly stiffened and her hands gripped the edge of the table. In 2019, Amazon announces plans to build a second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens, which is your district. He pulled out economic projections. This meant 25,000 jobs and not minimum wage jobs. These were professional positions with an average salary of $150,000 per year. It meant direct investment of over $2 billion into your community. It meant tax revenue that would have funded schools and infrastructure for decades. He spread out news clippings from that time. You led the opposition. You organized protests. You called it corporate welfare. You said the tax incentives were a giveaway to a billionaire who did not need help. He pulled out a statement from Amazon, and it worked. Amazon pulled out. They took those 25,000 jobs somewhere else. They invested those billions of dollars in a different community. He looked at her. You celebrated. You called it a victory for the people. Your supporters cheered. He paused. But a victory for which people exactly? He pulled out an email. This is from your personal account sent to a major donor 1 week after Amazon announced they were withdrawing. He read slowly and carefully, making sure every word was heard. Quote, "The Amazon thing worked out even better than we expected. Those tech workers would have completely gentrified the district within 5 years. They would have voted for centrist Democrats, or even Republicans. Better to keep the current voter base in place. Poor people who depend on government programs are reliable voters for us. That is our base. That is our path to power." End quote. The hearing room was absolutely silent, and no one moved. You did not kill those 25,000 jobs because of principle, Bongino said slowly. You killed them because financially secure and well-educated voters might not need you anymore. He set the email down. That is 25,000 families. That is 25,000 chances for working people in your district to build wealth, buy homes, and send their kids to good colleges. It was a chance to achieve the American dream you claimed to fight for. He looked at her. And you killed it deliberately, because their success would have threatened your political power. Ocasio-Cortez was shaking now. Her voice came out strangled. She stammered that the email was not what she meant, and was being taken completely out of context. What did you mean then? Bongino asked. Explain it. Tell the people in your district what you meant when you said it is better to keep them poor and dependent. She did not answer. She couldn't. Bongino pulled out phone records. Amazon was cold calculation and political strategy. This next part is personal. This is what you really think about the people who trusted you. He held up a thick printout. These are text messages from your personal cell phone obtained legally through a warrant issued as part of an ongoing federal investigation into campaign finance violations. He found a specific page. March 15, 2021 text message to a college friend from your Boston University days. He read slowly, letting each word land. Quote, "These Bronx people are honestly so easy to manipulate. Just say the word socialism a few times and throw in some Spanish phrases, and they cheer like trained seals, end quote. Gasps came from the gallery. A staffer walked out of the room. Bongino continued reading the same conversation from 2 minutes later. Quote, "They will vote for me literally no matter what I do. They are not smart enough to realize when they are being played. All I have to do is say I am fighting for them, and they believe it." End quote. More gasps were heard, and someone in the gallery was crying. And then this one. Quote, "The Bronx is basically just my brand at this point, like a logo I own. I would never in a million years actually live there again, can you imagine?" End quote. He set the phone records down. Those are your words. They are your private thoughts, written to a friend, when you thought no one would ever see them. They were written when you felt safe enough to say what you actually believe. Ocasio-Cortez's voice was barely a whisper and sounded broken. She claimed those texts were taken completely out of context, and she was venting about pressures. What context makes it acceptable to call your voters trained seals? Silence followed. What context makes it okay to say they are too stupid to know when they are being played? More silence followed. What context makes calling your district just a brand that you own anything other than contempt for the people who elected you? Bongino did not wait for an answer. There is no context that makes any of that acceptable. There is just you saying what you really believe when you thought you were safe. He pulled out more documents. Let's talk about who you actually employ and who you trust to serve your constituents. He spread out personnel records. There are 14 full-time staffers in your congressional office. I went through their backgrounds, their resumes, and their histories. He pointed to the data. 12 of them are from out of state and moved to New York to work for you. 10 have Ivy League degrees. Only 2 actually grew up in your district. Only 2 are actually from the community you claim to represent. He looked at her. The champion of the working-class Bronx can't find qualified workers from the Bronx. He pulled out another document. Your Hispanic outreach coordinator, the person responsible for connecting you with the Latino community, was raised in suburban Connecticut. She attended Yale and does not speak fluent Spanish. He set it down, but she had the right family connections and knew the right people from the right schools. He pulled out more employment records. Meanwhile, there are young people in your district who would give anything for a chance to work in Congress. There are kids who grew up in the Bronx, went to public schools, and actually know the community. They could actually connect with constituents. He shook his head. You never gave them a chance. They did not have the right credentials or the right pedigrees. Bongino pulled out one more piece of evidence. Speaking of your connection to the community, let's talk about your heritage and your identity. Ocasio-Cortez tensed visibly. You present yourself as a Latina from the Bronx, a daughter of the working class, and a woman connected to her Puerto Rican roots. He pulled out a transcript. This is from a Univision interview last year where you attempted to answer several questions in Spanish. Here is what a professional linguist who reviewed the tape had to say. He read from the analysis. Quote, the subject speaks Spanish at approximately an intermediate tourist level. Her pronunciation is heavily Americanized. Her grammar is consistently incorrect in ways that a native speaker raised in a Spanish-speaking household would never make. The errors suggest someone who learned Spanish as a second language in school rather than at home. End quote. He set it down. You perform being Latina for the cameras. You use Spanish phrases as props. But the actual language, the actual culture, and the actual connection to the community were things you never really had. Ocasio-Cortez was crying now, tears cutting lines through her makeup and mascara running. She insisted her family is Puerto Rican, And she is Puerto Rican. She called this a racist attack on her identity. It is not an attack on Puerto Ricans, Congresswoman. It is an observation about you specifically and about the gap between the identity you perform and the person you actually are. Bongino's voice softened slightly, not with sympathy, but with something closer to pity. You grew up in Yorktown Heights, where the median household income is $96,000 a year. It is one of the wealthier suburbs in New York, with nice houses, good schools, safe streets, and country clubs nearby. He paused. There is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with having a comfortable childhood or being fortunate. He looked at her. But that is not the story you tell, is it? You tell people you are from the Bronx, from the struggle, and from the streets. You do this because that story sells better, because that story gets donations, and because that story wins elections. He shook his head slowly. You stole the identity of your own community. You appropriated their struggle, their story, and their pain to advance your career. And in private, you laugh at them for being stupid enough to believe you. He closed the folder. That is not democratic socialism, Congresswoman. That is not fighting for the working class. That is just fraud, plain and simple fraud. The hearing room felt different now. The energy had shifted completely. The confident arena of political theater had become something else, something quieter and sadder. Ocasio-Cortez sat slumped in her chair with her makeup ruined. The polished warrior who had walked in that morning had been replaced by something smaller and broken. "I want to respond," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "I have the right to respond to these accusations." Chairman James nodded and stated that the witness has concluded his testimony, so the Congresswoman may make a statement. Ocasio-Cortez straightened in her chair. She tried to find the fire that had always come so naturally before. She tried to summon the fighter who had never backed down. "This is a political witch hunt," she began, though her voice cracked. But she pushed through, calling it a coordinated attack by right-wing forces who are terrified of strong, progressive women. Every piece of so-called evidence presented today has been taken out of context, twisted, manipulated, and weaponized by people who want to silence the voice of working people in this country. She looked at the cameras. She tried to find her audience. They are afraid of us, afraid of a movement that threatens their grip on power. So they dig through our emails, our private text messages, and our personal lives, looking for anything they can twist into a scandal. Her voice gained some strength. "I will not be silenced. I will not be intimidated. I will not apologize for fighting for the people who need a champion in Washington." She turned to face Bongino directly. "You are a failed cop who couldn't cut it in law enforcement. You are a conspiracy theorist who peddles nonsense to angry people for money. You are a puppet for billionaires who want to crush the dreams of ordinary Americans." She lifted her chin. "Nothing you have said here today changes who I am or what I stand for." The room waited. Bongino slowly reached back into his briefcase, asking if she was done. He pulled out one final document because he had something else she should see. He set it on the table. "This is a cooperation agreement signed 6 months ago by Saikat Chakrabarti, your former chief of staff. He is the man who built your entire political operation from the ground up." The color drained completely from Ocasio-Cortez's face. "He has been talking to federal investigators for half a year. He provided the emails, the financial records, and the text messages. Everything I presented today came from the man who knows exactly how your operation worked, because he helped build it." Bongino pulled out another document regarding her boyfriend Riley Roberts. "He has been interviewed twice by the FBI. He provided detailed records of every payment he received and exactly what he did to earn them, which was nothing. Another document showed 4 former staff members have given sworn statements about the working conditions in your office. They detailed the unpaid overtime, the verbal abuse, and the threats against anyone who complained. He spread them all across the table. You called this a witch hunt. But witch hunts chase imaginary enemies. The evidence against you is documented, corroborated, and real. Ocasio-Cortez turned desperately to her colleagues, the other members of the squad. These were the women who had stood beside her through every controversy and who had defended her against every attack. Ilhan, Rashida, Ayana, you know this is political persecution. You know what they are trying to do. Say something. Tell them. Silence filled the air. Representative Omar studied her notes intently. Representative Bush was suddenly fascinated by something on her phone. Representative Presley looked away out toward the gallery at nothing in particular. No one spoke. They are not coming to rescue you, Bongino said quietly. They have known this was coming for weeks. We made sure they knew, and they have already made their choices. He pulled out printed statements. Representative Omar released one 45 minutes ago, stating she has no knowledge of Representative Ocasio-Cortez's financial arrangements and cannot speak to any ongoing investigation. He showed another paper where Representative Tlaib released a statement this morning. Quote, each congressional office is responsible for its own compliance with campaign finance regulations. I wish my colleague well during this difficult period, end quote. Another showed Representative Presley hasn't released a formal statement, but she unfollowed you on all social media platforms yesterday, and she has deleted every photograph featuring both of you from the last 3 years. He set the papers down. They saw the evidence, they calculated the odds, and they chose to save themselves. Ocasio-Cortez looked around the room with growing desperation at her staff, who would not meet her eyes. She looked at her colleagues who were finding reasons to be anywhere else. She looked at the cameras that were still rolling, capturing every moment of her collapse. She was utterly alone. "This isn't fair," she whispered, the words coming out broken like a child's. "I was trying to help people. I was trying to change things. I was trying to make a difference." Bongino's voice was not cruel when he responded. It was tired and disappointed. Maybe you were once at the beginning. Maybe there was a version of you who actually believed the things you said. He closed his briefcase. But somewhere along the way, you started believing you were special. You believed that the rules did not apply to you. You believed that you were too important to be held accountable. You believed that the people who supported you were tools to be used rather than citizens to be served. He looked at her with something that might have been pity. "I do not think you are evil, Congresswoman. I think you are what happens when someone gets famous too fast. You got too much power too young, with no one around willing to tell them no. I think you got lost somewhere between your first viral tweet and your 50th magazine cover." He stood up. "But that does not undo the damage. It does not give back the money. It does not unbreak the trust. It does not help the people you hurt." Chairman James cleared his throat and addressed the room formally. "This committee has heard extensive testimony and examined substantial evidence regarding potential violations of federal campaign finance law, wire fraud statutes, and congressional ethics standards." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Based on the proceedings today, I am directing committee staff to prepare a formal referral to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. Additionally, I am recommending that the House Ethics Committee open its own investigation immediately." He looked at Ocasio-Cortez. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you are strongly advised to retain experienced legal counsel. This hearing is adjourned. He brought the gavel down with a sharp crack. Ocasio-Cortez tried to stand, but her legs did not cooperate. She grabbed the table for support, her knuckles white against the wood. Her staff rushed over to help her. She pushed them away with trembling hands, saying, "She can walk out of here herself." She made it 3 steps toward the door before the wall of camera flashes started. It was a blinding storm of light and noise. Reporters were shouting questions from every direction. "Congresswoman, will you resign? Do you have a response to the text messages? What do you say to the donors who trusted you? Will you cooperate with the federal investigation?" She did not answer because she couldn't. Words had always been her weapon, but now they had abandoned her completely. The door closed behind her. The cameras kept flashing, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was already gone. Her career did not end with handcuffs or a dramatic confrontation. It ended with silence and closed doors, and somehow that was worse. The news spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within 1 hour, the video clips were everywhere. Social media exploded with reaction. Within 2 hours, every cable network had cleared their regular programming for continuous coverage. Within 3 hours, the first calls for resignation came from members of her own party. They were quiet calls and careful calls, but they were calls nonetheless. In the Bronx, the reaction was different from the political chatter in Washington. Maria Gonzalez sat in her small apartment that evening, watching the news coverage on a television she could not afford to replace. The screen was old, and the picture was fuzzy, but the images were clear enough. In her weathered hands, she held a donation receipt from 2018. It was for $50, a full day's wages from years ago when she had believed. A local reporter had found her somehow, knocking on her door with a camera crew looking for the human story behind the numbers. "I believed in her," Maria said quietly. Her English was accented but clear. She had practiced these words in her head all afternoon. "I told my daughters to look at this woman. She looks like us. She talks about our struggles. She came from nothing, and now she is in Congress fighting for people like us." She looked down at the faded receipt. "I told my girls that if they worked hard and stayed honest, maybe they could do something important too. Maybe they could change things." The tears came slowly. "I skipped buying groceries that week to send her that money. I told myself it was an investment in our future, in our community, and in someone who understood." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "She called us stupid. She said we were easy to manipulate. She laughed at us with her rich friends." The reporter asked what she wanted to say to Ocasio-Cortez. Maria thought for a long moment before answering. "I want to say that she broke something important. It was not just my trust, but something bigger. She made people like me afraid to believe in anyone ever again." She looked at the donation receipt one more time. "That is the worst part. It is not the $50 because I can earn $50, but I do not know how to get back the hope she stole." Across the district, similar scenes played out through the evening and into the night. They happened in bodegas and laundromats. They happened in crowded apartments where multiple families shared small spaces. They happened in late-night diners where working people grabbed meals between shifts. People who had believed watched their faith collapse in real time. They had given her their votes, their money, their hope, and their dreams for something better. She had given them a performance. Dan Bongino did one interview that evening, and only one. He turned down the others. The reporter asked if he was proud of what he had accomplished. Bongino shook his head slowly. "Proud is not the right word for any of this. There is nothing here to be proud of. He paused, choosing his words carefully. A young woman destroyed her own career through arrogance and greed. Thousands of people who believed in her feel betrayed tonight. Her district still does not have the 25,000 jobs she killed. The immigrant families she used as props are still suffering at the border. He looked directly at the camera. I did not create this situation. I just exposed it. I presented evidence and let people draw their own conclusions. The reporter asked if he felt any sympathy for Ocasio-Cortez. Bongino thought about it before answering. I feel sympathy for who she could have been. She had real gifts, intelligence, charisma, and the ability to connect with people and inspire them. If she had used those gifts honestly, she might have actually accomplished something meaningful. He shook his head. But she made different choices, and those choices led here. Later that night, Dan Bongino sat alone in his home office. The television was off, and his phone was silenced. The folder that had contained his evidence was now filed away, its contents in the hands of federal investigators. He thought about the young woman who had walked into Congress 4 years ago. He had watched her rise like everyone else. He had seen the fire in her eyes and the certainty in her voice. She was 29 years old and absolutely sure she was going to change the world. Somewhere along the way, she had started making choices. They were small ones at first, probably a donor not questioned too closely, or an expense report fudged slightly. Perhaps it was a private text message that said what she really thought. Until the small compromises became big ones. Until the lies grew too heavy to carry. Until the person she performed on camera had nothing in common with who she actually was in private. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor at the bureau. New file on your desk tomorrow. Different name, same pattern. Bongino read the message twice, then set his phone down. There was always another one. There was always another politician who believed they were above the rules. There was always another true believer who traded their principles for power and comfort. There was always another promise broken to the people who could least afford broken promises. He filed the folder away in his cabinet with the others. Then he turned off the light and headed home to his family. Tomorrow, the work would continue. It always did. 3 days later, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez submitted her resignation from Congress. The letter was brief and cited a need to focus on personal matters and spend time with family. It did not admit to any wrongdoing. It did not apologize to her donors. It did not acknowledge the people she had called stupid and easy to manipulate. The investigation continued without her. Subpoenas were issued, grand juries were convened, and the wheels of justice, slow but grinding, began to turn. In the Bronx, life went on. Maria Gonzalez went back to work at the laundromat the morning after the hearing. She had bills to pay, children to feed, and no time for grief over broken political dreams. But she took down the poster she had kept on her wall. It was the one with Ocasio-Cortez's face and the slogan about fighting for working families. She folded it carefully and put it in the trash. Some things once broken cannot be repaired.